Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 7 of the State of Craft. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sami. I'm the CEO of CertiCraft. We are on a mission to help craft cannabis producers transition into and thrive within the regulated framework here in Canada. And the State of Craft is a podcast series that we do to discuss the state of the legal craft cannabis industry, which is near and dear to all of our hearts. Before I introduce our guest for today, I just want to touch on a few housekeeping items here. I see there are a few of you guys trickling in. Hey, Kirk, is there any chance you have a pair of headphones you can use? I'm hearing some feedback coming in.
I do have a pair of headphones I can use. They are
Thank you.
right
I appreciate
here.
it.
I'll just have to quickly
test. Can you hear this? Okay, and then while you're dealing with that, I'll do the housekeeping items. For those of you trickling in, hi, nice to see you. We have a chat. We'd love it if you wanted to interact and say hi and post any comments throughout this conversation here. If you have questions, if you want to ask Kirk a question, there is a separate questions tab at the top there. So please ask your questions there. If you like a question, upvote it. The last 15 minutes of this talk, in about 45 minutes from now, is going to be dedicated to going through those questions, and we'll go through from whatever is the most upvoted onwards until we run out of time. So with all that being said, I'd like to introduce Kirk, but first I want to check in. Kirk, is your audio working? Can you hear me?
Yeah, Sami, if you're trying to go to me, I cannot hear you because you have me put my headphones in, and that's requiring me to do a bunch of device management stuff.
Okay, then while Kirk is dealing with that, I'm gonna sing a song for everybody. How about somebody give me a song topic in the chat there, and we'll have a nice improvised song here. Come on, nobody's jumping on this opportunity. Oh, Owen's typing something. What's Owen gonna say? Somewhere over the rainbow. No, I want to improvise. Okay, I'll improvise about being somewhere over the rainbow with whatever Lisa's typing or Sarah. We are gonna be friends. Okay. A song about friends over the rainbow. So once upon a time, I was trying to tell a rhyme, and so I flew way up high over the rainbow. Oh, my.
We're not getting the headphones, Sami.
Okay, never mind. I'll just deal with a little bit of feedback in my ear.
And you want me to spend another 10 minutes doing that?
No, not worth it. I'll just deal with a little bit of feedback. That's okay. I apologize to everybody. Usually we have 30 minutes ahead of this series to deal with these kind of issues, but today I had a major brain fart and forgot that I moved from the NIC, where we are right now, to a different office. And I showed up here and I was like, where's my computer? Where's my microphone? Oh, shit. I don't have my stuff here anymore. So I had to run and deal with that. Anyway, without further ado, I would like to introduce to all of you the venerable Kirk Tousaw. Hi, Kirk.
Thanks, Sami. Appreciate, I think, both introductions, although I didn't necessarily hear the first one.
There wasn't a first one. I just asked if you could hear us, and then
beautiful.
The answer
I
was
like that. Excuse my technical inexperience. If I'm dropping into Warzone, I can usually get this headphones working immediately, but for some reason, I think it's the webcam has sort of commandeered my mic in a way that I haven't been able to get rid of yet. Appreciate you having me on. Thanks to CertiCraft for putting this on and putting this series on. Also, thanks for putting out an awesome piece of software that we use in our business every day, multiple times a day, to try to keep us on track with Health Canada compliance. And maybe we'll have some more to say about not just the software, but the burden of Health Canada compliance later in the talk.
Thank you very much.
For those of you who don't know me and aren't familiar with me, I'll just give you a sort of a quick background. My name's Kirk. I am currently the CEO of Great Gardner Farms, which is a micro cultivator in the beautiful Cowichan Valley on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. My good friend and business partner, Matt Barron, from House of the Great Gardner International Seed Company, and I founded it in 2018. Prior to that, I practiced law a bit here in Canada. Mostly in the cannabis space. Started out, I guess, in the mid-2000s here in Canada after a stint with the BC Civil Liberties Association and the BC Marijuana Party. I then worked with John Conroy, the QC, my great mentor, great friend, and one of the old guard and greatest cannabis lawyers this country's ever seen, and just a generally awesome guy. And I was fortunate to hook up with him because of our shared love of cannabis and cannabis legalization, which I've been talking about and advocating since I was in the 10th grade way back in '86, to anybody that would listen to me. Got started in that with going to Hash Bash in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I grew up in a small town outside of Detroit, Michigan, and went to my first Hash Bash as a 16-year-old and was like, holy shit, there's a lot of other people that think the same things that I do about the injustice of cannabis prohibition. I'd been arrested for weed a couple of times by then, and it pissed me off more than anything else. Ultimately it was slaps on the wrist in terms of punishment, because I was either a juvenile or a young adult in the criminal justice system, and a white guy with money that could hire a lawyer. Let's not forget any of those things, because those are were super important back then, and they're still super important today in terms of the privileges you enjoy, both from prosecution and advantages just in the industry generally, in the world generally. But it pissed me off, and I started saying this is unjust, and I had a sort of interest in social sciences and philosophy and justice that I pursued at Michigan State University with a philosophy degree, and a fairly high-minded sounding major called Justice, Morality, and the Constitutional Democracy, which prepared me very well to ultimately go to law school in the States, practice for 4 years there in big firm civil litigation. Did a little work with the firm's criminal practice. Most big firms have a couple of criminal lawyers on staff to deal with issues that come up with their otherwise contract or estate planning clients or their families and friends. Was fortunate to work with a couple of great lawyers there that taught me a lot about how to conduct myself in the courtroom, how to be effective, how to care about your clients and their lives, and understand that you're there to help solve their problems. But in 2001, the sort of post 9/11 wave of nationalism and hatred for brown people was sweeping the U.S., and I'd always been sort of disgusted by nationalism mostly, and the rah-rahness of it all, not to mention war. My wife and I at the time just sort of cast it around, what can we do? I'm a Canadian citizen, born in the States to Canadian parents. And I thought, all right, well, I'll go back to school. I don't, the big firm life, I was pretty good at it. Had a big client base, made good money. But it was soul crushing. It was intellectually stimulating, but sort of soul crushing and time crushing. And so I applied to McGill and UBC, and we ended up choosing UBC and moving out to Vancouver sight unseen, really. And I got a master's in law, writing about cannabis prohibition, the Kane, Clay, and Melma Levine cases that were winding their way to the Supreme Court of Canada at the time, in the early 2000s, and the Senate report, which came out in '04, comprehensively looking at everything having to do with cannabis prohibition, cannabis legalization, both from social science, policy, evidence, medical, philosophy. What does justice mean? What is the right thing for a society? I mean, it was really a beautiful report. It's still as relevant today as it was then, even though we've legalized cannabis. We're only one of 2 countries in the world that have done so. So it's, there's a long way to go there across the world. But that then led to working with the BC Marijuana Party and working with John. And really my first big case ended up being a constitutional challenge on behalf of the Vancouver Island Compassion Society and their grower, 2 growers at the time, Mike Swallow and Matt Barron. That's how Matt and I met. And that friendship, was really formed smoking joints at the end of the day at court. We'd go back to the Vic's back room and we'd smoke hash and smoke joints and talk about the day in court and strategize with John and Philippe Lucas, who ran the club, and the other folks and the witnesses. And, that trial ended up lasting several years, and we were ultimately successful. We got the MMAR declared unconstitutional. The law changed slightly because of the way Health Canada was operating at the time, but it did change. And Matt and I sort of been friends ever since. I kept practicing law. He kept growing for the club, never stopped. In fact, after his boss just lit back up the next day and kept going because the patient still needed medicine. And we became good friends and sort of worked together throughout that span. And when legalization came around, it seemed like a great opportunity to, I was getting tired of law. It had become a lot of regulatory stuff. In my estimation, many of the charter battles had been won, and further wins in the face of a legal, regulated commercial market were unlikely to. I didn't see the wins coming in the courtroom as much anymore as I did either in the boardrooms or in the political process, and trying to get municipalities, provinces, and the federal government aligned on how best to, move forward into this. I don't like calling it a new industry because obviously there's a well-established cannabis industry in this country, but a new legal industry and the issues that would arise there. And so we had an opportunity to form Great Gardner Farms. We entered into a consulting and collaboration agreement with Canopy Growth Corporation because we knew a lot of the top people there. Adam Greenblatt came out of the dispensary world, one of the early legacy edible makers in Montreal, was our principal contact and friend there. The president then and now of Canopy is Rade Kovacevic, one of the earliest dispensary pioneers in Ontario. Ran Guelph Compassion Club at a time when, frankly, it wasn't easy to be in the compassion club or dispensary business. We're talking a time when mandatory minimum sentencing was coming in, when raids were happening, and there weren't many of these businesses to help shield each other. When there was still a lot of demonization of cannabis. Those were times that were quite a bit different than, say, the 2015-16 era, when there were hundreds, if not thousands, of dispensaries across the country. The police were overwhelmed. It was relatively safe and relatively easy to participate in the industry. So, there were some pioneers at the highest levels of the company, which I thought was super cool. Learned a ton through that experience. Ultimately, we weren't able to launch any of our Great Gardner Farms flower or seeds through that relationship, but it was certainly something where I learned a lot about how A, big companies work, and B, the myriad of things you have to deal with if you're working in a heavily regulated industry. Lessons that continue to be relevant today, even though we have a micro cultivation facility here, where we have essentially 4 small flowering rooms, 8 lights each. We're doing predominantly seed production and genetic development. We brought in our library of genetics. Many of them are completely unique to us. Matt has bred them or worked with them over the years, and an inventory of a whole lot of seeds. And our aim in that's 1/3 of a bigger facility. So eventually we're going to build out the other 2/3 and get into flower production and making our own probably hash and rosin and things like that, if it makes sense for us to do so. But for now, we're working on genetic development and seeds, and we're thinking that there's a consumer market for seeds. Obviously, people like to buy seeds and grow from seed and have their 4 plants, whether it's indoors or in a greenhouse or outdoors. But also, other micro cultivators, because of the space limitations, it's awfully hard to develop your own genetics in-house. And it's my perception is there was a point at which a lot of these places all had the same or similar varieties, and we hope to help supply them with unique cultivars.
So Kirk, I just
background.
I just want to quickly jump in there. If there's a micro or a licensed producer on this call right now and they wanted to get genetics from you, how can they reach you?
Oh, yeah. I'm easy to find. Kirk at greatgardenerfarms.com or Kirk Tousaw at gmail.com, or just, shoot me a message on Twitter. Don't send me a Facebook message. I do not look at my Facebook messages. I try very hard not to look at Facebook at all. But a lot of families on there and friends I don't get to see too often, particularly with the pandemic. So I've been on a bit more lately, but, hit me with an email, and we're happy to talk to you about that anytime.
Cool. And Nick shared a few links there, an email and a Twitter link for Kirk, so you can use that if you want.
Twitter if you want my unvarnished thinking on a number of different things.
And I can say that I love Great Gardener Farms. I'm a fan of everything you guys do, and I'm excited to see how your journey develops over the coming months and years.
Well, thanks, Sammy. You guys are a big part of that. I mean, we were hunting for compliant software pre-licensing because we knew that the paperwork burden was tremendous, and the opportunities to go off sides unintentionally were also tremendous. And it was, we looked at a number of different software solutions. We liked your guys' vibe quite a bit. You'll remember our initial conversation was quite smoky over Zoom, and that vibe's big to us, right? Working with people that love cannabis as much as we do is big to us, and the software worked for what we needed it to do. It was the right price. It wasn't overcomplicated. The ramp up to using it was not difficult, and we've been pretty stoked so far. We filed one CRA report and one Health Canada report so far, and nobody called us to say we screwed up. So as far as I'm concerned, that's a win-win right there.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear you feel that way. And thanks for the kind words there.
Yeah.
So
let's true, or I wouldn't say them.
Let's shift gears into the meat of this discussion we're going to have today, which is all about the state of the legal craft cannabis industry here in Canada today. So generally, I like to ask 3 questions throughout this conversation, and then of course more questions will emerge from what you actually say. And just to give you and the audience a heads up of the format, it starts with what's going well in the craft cannabis industry, what's not going well, and then what can we do to make the things that aren't going well become better. So on that note, Kirk, what do you feel has been going well, if anything at all, in the legal craft cannabis world? So
that really came out of nowhere, Sammy. Didn't see that one coming.
Oh, you didn't?
Okay. I'll do my best to answer. Hey, look, I think there's 2 parts to that, right? The first part is sort of a broad statement that what's going well in the legal craft cannabis industry is that there is a legal craft cannabis industry. I think we get caught up a lot of the time, especially people who've been fighting this fight for a long time, the fight for legalization and for cannabis justice. I think we get caught up in, railing against what's wrong. So I'm glad you start with talking about what's right. And one of the things that's right is we basically don't arrest people for cannabis anymore. There are raids from time to time on commercial growers or commercial operators, and nobody should be raided or arrested for cannabis in any way, shape, or form. There are better, more appropriate tools to deal with people who want to engage in commercial activity outside of a commercially regulated sphere. And we could talk more about how we incentivize and work on accomplishing the goal of bringing people into the fold instead of excluding them. But by and large, there's almost no arrests in this country anymore for cannabis possession. There's exceedingly few arrests for any kind of cannabis crimes. And that's a fantastic thing. And what we've seen specific to what's going well with craft cannabis, a few things come to mind. One is there's a whole lot of organizations that are talking about craft cannabis, working with craft cannabis producers and processors, and would-be producers and processors and retail stores, small storefronts, mom and pop businesses to assist regulators at every level of government, municipal, provincial, and federal, to help make this the industry that we all want it to be, and that frankly consumers and Canadians deserve to have servicing them. So lots and lots of activity from the Craft Cannabis Association of British Columbia to all kinds of different organizations that are working in different ways towards what I think is a common goal, which is the vibrancy of the craft marketplace. And so that's fantastic. The other piece of it is we're seeing every Friday, Health Canada releases its list of new cultivators and new processors. And there's always micros on there now, right? And there's more and growing. And in fact, most weeks there's more micros being licensed than what used to be LPs, but now are standard cultivators or standard processors. So that's fantastic. I think there's 53 micros currently in British Columbia. The vast majority of those are micro cultivators, not micro processors, and that does pose some complications that we can talk about downstream. But there's an increasing and growing body of people doing this legally.
Yeah, and it has been exponential growth. Like there were across Canada in 2018, there was one micro license. In 2019, I believe it was on the order of 25 or so. Last year it was 104, I think, and this year we're on track to break through that again. So it's really exciting to see that the frequency and the rate increase every month or two as well.
And I think part of that is more and more people believing it's possible. And that's a big part of the puzzle. I mean, we're not in 2018 anymore when I think it was legitimate to say it's nearly impossible to penetrate this market and to go legal, so to speak. That's not the case anymore. We can talk about Great Gardener Farms and our own experiences in that licensing process to sort of illustrate that in some ways. But I think that increasing pace is because it's become easier. It's not easy. Let's not be glib about it, right? Like,
there's a lot of barriers. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have sleepless nights. You're gonna have a lot of work ahead of you. There's a lot of unnecessary, in my view, hoops to jump through, and a lot of unnecessary once you get licensed compliance issues. But it's doable. Now, I could tell you, if you want, Sami, just briefly about sort of our experience with licensing at Great Gardener Farms.
Sure, yeah, I think that's super interesting.
So we started, here's one of the things that's unnecessary, right? And I know why it exists, but Health Canada requires you to build a facility first and then apply. So it's a two-step process. You build a facility, then you apply. I think it's less risky now to build your facility in the hopes you're going to get licensed, because it's I think if you do things right, there's a reasonable expectation you'll be licensed. So, putting that money up is less risky than it was a couple of years ago. But at the same time, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I've got to put all this dough up front, and then I've got to keep the facility, I'm paying rent, or I've got to keep the lights on, or whatever. I've got these carrying costs for the time it takes to go through the application process. I know why Health Canada did it, right? They got thousands of applications to be a producer, a lot, if not the majority of which weren't ever going to go anywhere. The people never pushed them forward. They essentially abandoned them. So they use a lot of government time and resources. And then the people that are actually trying to go forward have all their shit delayed because these people who just put the applications in and never really did anything, maybe they're trying to sell an application in progress. Maybe they just, maybe they gave up. I mean, that's not an illegitimate reason. Back a couple of years ago, it was tough. But, the government said, well, I mean, we're devoting 60% of our resources to applications that'll never end up in a license. We need to have you have some skin in the game before we start expending our limited resources, because we're taking heat from people for not being timely. That's not an illogical position to take. I do think there's a better way to do it that maybe involves putting up, a refundable good faith bond or something like that to show that you're serious about going forward without actually having to sink the costs into the building the facility. Because it's hard to attract investment dollars in particular when, you don't have a license. Hey, where's your application? Well, actually, we can't make an application until after we spend all your money. That's a tough sell.
Yeah, I remember when they announced that change, just instantaneously, like not all, but like 80% of the craft growers we were talking to, their timelines were delayed by over a year because all their investors just pulled out. They were like, no, we're not taking this risk. We want that like approval from Health Canada first. That used to be a
100%.
requirement for any investor. And
you know, maybe it's a 2-stage process. Maybe it's put in an application that, you know, has how are you going to operate and how are you, you know, who are your people? And then Health Canada can do a paper review of that reasonably quickly and say, look, either there's huge, vast deficiencies here, or these people aren't security clearable, and this isn't going to work. Back to the drawing board. Okay, right? That seems quick and efficient. And then maybe you don't get a license at that point, but you get a letter that's like an intent to issue. You know, if you build your facility along what you've told us, and these are actually the people involved, and this is how you do it, the reasonable expectation is you get licensed. I have to think that there's a solve there somewhere. But, you know, the other side of that is, you know, just from the GGF perspective. So I like to start, if I talk about this, by listing privileges, because we can be blind to them, and there's probably some that I'll miss just because I'm blind to them too. Mm-hmm. We're men in a male-dominated industry. We're white men in a white-dominated industry. We both come from backgrounds that gave us skill sets that made it easier to make this leap. Matt's been growing a plant continuously, cannabis plant, for more than 25 years. You know, has won 54 international awards for cannabis all around the world. I have a regulatory background in law. We both have, you know, reputational profiles of one extent or another. You know, those are advantages. We also own the property that the facility's on. The company, Greg Gunner Farms, rents it from the other company that owns it. But in any event, essentially it's our property. And the build out, you know, we didn't have to start from an empty shell. We started in an existing building, but it still cost a fair bit of money. And we had that money to put in. We didn't need to seek investors. You know, we put our own personal resources into it. So we started from a position that's ahead of somebody that's just maybe out there watching this going, hey, I might want to try that. That doesn't have the property, the experience in the space. Going to be a harder path for you. And that's just the reality of it, but not an impossible path. It took us about 5 months to do the build out. We have a contractor that we've used before that actually rents one of the houses on the site. So, you know, it was that's another advantage. We knew our contractor, we like our contractor, we trust our contractor, and he was able to manage the project, the build out project with, you know, we were there every day with back and forth, but you know, that's an invaluable relationship. We applied for the license in January of 2021. Health Canada's application guide is quite good. It tells you everything you need to know to apply for a cannabis license. You can hire a consultant to do it. You can hire a lawyer to help you do it. I don't think you need to. If you're good at reading rules and you know, filling out some forms, you're going to be able to get through the process. There's a lot of free resources out there to help you, including, by the way, Health Canada. I found during the application process, you know, we ran into things that we didn't understand. We submitted answers to some of their questions that didn't make a lot of sense in hindsight and caused them to sort of scratch their heads. But they were so responsive. I mean, I could send them an email and I'd have a response certainly within a week, often the next day, or an offer to hop on the phone and talk through it.
I'm curious about that. Is this like a particular rep that you had at Health Canada? Is this like the general Health Canada helpline? Like what were you?
It's the general email account that every applicant can write to. So we didn't. Now, what I think happens is you end up getting assigned somebody on your file when it reaches a certain point, because we did deal with the same person on multiple occasions. But I got to tell you, like, I'm a guy that, you know, has been fighting with Health Canada for the last 15 years at least. And a lot of that had to do with responsiveness, particularly in the medical community. Like anyone that's done the MMAR thing, 8 years ago, and even today at times, knows that getting answers had been exceedingly difficult. I found in this process it wasn't hard, and they were
a lot of our customers have shared very different experiences of like. I myself, whenever I reach out to Health Canada with questions about changes they have to the CTS or whatever you might have, like I find it takes a long time to get a response. And when I do get a response, usually it's not even applicable to it's like a copy paste from some FAQ that doesn't answer my question. I wonder if there's another privilege of you being Kirk Tousaw, who has taken Health Canada to court. If they're like, oh, let's make him happy.
I mean, Sami, I think there's probably some truth to that, right? Human beings being who they are. I hope there's not a lot of truth to that, right?
I hope so too. I hope they have legitimately changed for growers applying, because it used to be a nightmare.
Absolutely. And I certainly, have worked with people who have had those same responsiveness problems. I can only speak to our experiences which were uniformly positive. Now, I think the other part of that is it sort of relates probably back to the other privilege I was talking about. It's like I speak the language, the regulatory language pretty well. And so it may just be that our concerns or comments or questions were, didn't require a lot of thought on the other end. Let's put it that way, right? So, that was our experience. Your method may vary, and your results may vary, but we applied in January. The full package went in. There was a period of sort of radio silence, right? And that's a nervous period, obviously, because
Lisa in the chat's agreeing with you, and Kate, I assume you also are in that period as well, just waiting as well.
Lisa, exactly. When you get the reviewer, that's when you get a person that actually has your file, right? I mean, that it makes sense. Prior to that, it's sort of going through whatever internal stuff it goes through to get to the, hey, yeah, this is a serious application stage. We're going to assign a reviewer to it. The application's complete, and all of those things. So we had probably a 2 to 3 month span where there was, nothing. And, you sort of sit it out and you're like, should we bug them? Should we bug them? I don't want to bug them, but it's nerve wracking. And, Matt and I had concerns. We're the only owners of the company, the only shareholders of the company, but I mean, he's been in the legacy space for an awfully long time. Including being arrested for it. And even though he was absolutely discharged at his trial and we won a constitutional fight, he continued to operate in the legacy space. And the security piece is like, have you associated with, people that have broken the cannabis laws? And I mean, that was my entire clientele for, the better part of more than a decade. So, yes, I've associated with thousands of criminals in the cannabis space, proudly and happily, and I've really enjoyed my time with most of them. And myself, prior to becoming, licensed to produce and to consume, I broke the law. I've broken the cannabis law everywhere I've ever been, every day since I was 15 years old. I've been a criminal. When I got that first license in the mail, authorization to possess, it felt really surreal to no longer be breaking the law, because I was, in my 40s or maybe late 30s, and I had been a criminal my whole life. Like, every time I left the house, I was breaking the law with the weed in my pocket, and it was every day. So that was a weird moment. But so anyway, don't want to get too far off track. We had our 3 months of waiting, and then we got our first packet of RMIs, which are requests for more information. That's the government saying, okay, we have your application, but we need some more detail on these various pieces. And it was relatively straightforward. A lot of it, I think, on that first RMI was just, we had given the information, but we hadn't given it in the way they expected to see it, or in response to the portion of the application that they expected to see it in. So I ended up doing a lot of restating what I had already given them, but directly in response to that particular piece. So, that's probably, if I'd read the application guide a couple more times, I might have been able to suss that out for myself ahead of time. But it wasn't, there was nothing on there that was like hard to answer. And I think we had a good team at Grey Gardner Farms. Family business. We have a total of 5 employees, including Matt and I. Matt's longtime partner Sarah runs our seed division. My sister works for us, and we have one other employee that's been with us for an awfully long time, local fella. And so they did a great job putting the SOPs together, the application pieces together. I sort of assembled it, polished it, shipped it off. We went through those RMIs. We went through another set of RMIs that were a little more detailed. Describe your destruction process. We have a personal allard protected license at the same address, and so they wanted us to say, well, these two aren't going to intermingle, and no, of course not. Other than the day of the genetics amnesty, when you can sort of bring in all your genetics, there's no crossover whatsoever. And so we answered that second set of RMIs, and then we were on to the sort of, well, nothing's changed. You can check the status of your security clearances on the CTLS, which is the online system that you communicate.
Cannabis tracking and licensing system.
Yeah, exactly. Cannabis tracking and licensing. So that hadn't changed from submitted, and we're now we're like, well, I don't think there are any more RMIs. And talking to other applicants, they said, if your second set of RMIs is pretty straightforward, they wanted a tight turnaround, they wanted the answer in like 3 days, you're probably pretty close to licensing. And we're like, well, fuck. If we're close to licensing, where's the security approvals? And then boom, finally those emails came through. Our whole team got security cleared, sort of in one fell swoop. And we got, we didn't get much notice. I had heard they kind of let you know on Wednesday that the license is going to come on Friday. That did not happen for us. I woke up on May 21st. So about 5 months after the application went in, start to finish. And there was an email from Health Canada that was like, here's your license.
Is that a Friday?
That's a Friday. Yeah, Friday morning. I was like, well, okay, holy shit. Team, all hands on deck.
I remember you reached out to us right away. You're like, we need our account set up.
And, most of the team was cutting clones and bringing genetics in, and we had to go through and count all our seeds. I mean, we had 1.4 million seeds of 300 different strains, and so that all has to get stored properly and categorized, and so most of the team's sort of busy physically doing things in the grow, and I'm on CertiCraft, entering our data, using that license. For people that haven't used CertiCraft, they get pre-licensing. You get a sandbox site, so you get to learn the system and play around and make mistakes. But there's the real one where there's an audit trail and don't fuck up. And so I logged into the real one for the first time. I was super excited, and I started putting the strains in. Right, we brought over like 90 or something genetics in mom form. So that's 90 different batches. We could have done it as one, in hindsight, we could have done it as one batch and sort of sub-batched it out later as we turn those into mother plants. But, I was like, all right, boom, 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 boom. Here's our 90 strains and then seeds. And I'm like, at that point, I'm kind of like, I've been staring at this computer a long time, and I already made one mistake and frantically sort of emailed saying, oh, fuck, I typed the wrong number in, what do I do, kind of thing. And I'm like, I can't input 300 different strains, even though we had the weight and the number for each one. This is ridiculous. So there I got smart and I was like, okay, we're calling this the GGF mother load, S001, seed lot number 1, the GGF mother load goes into the system. And then now when we pull seeds out of that to use, or if another cultivator wants to buy seeds from us or whatever we're doing with them, then I sublot, then I create new batches of those with appropriate strain names and things from our internal spreadsheet. But it was quite a day, exciting day, long day, celebratory day. That was our process at GGF. So what I would say has gone right, to circle back to the actual question, is, this process exists. It is possible to take advantage of it. The turnaround for some, at least, and I'm seeing in the comments that maybe others aren't having quite the experience we did, it was relatively pain-free. And in fact, the hard part is actually not, is post-licensing. Your compliance portion, your paperwork portion takes up a ton of time and a ton of sort of resources. And it's a pretty hard industry. From the comments that I've had from other licensed micros, margins are tight. Not easy to get listed in provinces for flower in particular. There's a ton of competition out there. There's only so much warehouse space, so much shelf space. The provinces don't quite have, I think, the distribution piece dialed in the way it should be. Certainly, in BC, we need direct to retail sales to happen instantly. We need farm gate to happen as soon as possible. We need to have these avenues to get our product to market without going through the province.
And on that note, just a quick shout out that our next episode is actually with the BCLDB, with the LCRB and the Cannabis Secretariat's office, and we're going to talk all about their process of how they're creating and implementing direct delivery and farm gate. So that's going to be super interesting for anybody who is in BC and wants to hear it from the ministries themselves.
I'll be tuned in for that for sure. And I've had the opportunity to speak with the Secretariat and folks on a number of different occasions about that. And listen, these guys, and I say guys in a non-gendered way, so these folks take a lot of heat. And there's a lot of problems with the BC regulatory system, don't get me wrong. But they're also trying to integrate a provincial regulatory model with different municipal models that are varied and or non-existent, and with the federal model, which has peculiarities that make things difficult. So, I'll give you an example from a talk last night with the Craft Cannabis Association of BC. Is, you think about, okay, this direct to retail, we want to benefit the small producer. We want to benefit the small farm. We want, we kind of want this to be something like microbreweries can do in a way, and supply directly to the stores near them. But the geographic restrictions don't work so well for cannabis. The other thing that doesn't work so well is producers can't actually sell to anybody flower. They have to go through a processor. Yeah. So now think about it this way. Let's say the province says, all right, we're going to do direct, but it's only for micros. And all the micros go, yay, keep the big boys out. Well, there's 6 microprocessors in British Columbia, and they have a total output of 600 kilograms per year each. You've only moved the access issue to a different level. And now it's not a government access issue with the government buyer. It's hey, there's not enough microprocessors to service all the micro farms that exist in this province.
But to play devil's advocate for a moment, there's a few different standard processors in BC, on the island especially, that are specifically being created to bring craft cannabis to market. I'm thinking of integrated processing. I'm thinking
100%.
of blackfin extracts.
100%. You're not the devil's advocate because you're agreeing with me. Because my overall point is those people have to be able to participate in the direct to retail too. Otherwise, we get bogged down.
Totally. And the implementation hasn't been set yet. It's still underway. And, I was involved with the Craft Cannabis Association of BC and 3 other advocacy organizations here to draft a letter to the BCLDB, the LCRB, the Cannabis Secretariat's office on what we thought was really critical for implementation, which included a variety of things around that. And, they said that they were going to launch their consultation process 2 weeks ago. And we sent them that letter, and they haven't launched it since. And I have a feeling that letter really shifted their perception internally on how they had to do things. And that was our goal. We wanted to get it before the consultation went out, because once the consultation gets released, then that really sets the framework and the way in which the government thinks about whatever it is that they're creating. So
yeah, and change only happens really in the margins subsequent to that, right?
Yes, exactly. And so that was a big push to get that out. I got 4 different: the BC Craft Farmers Co-op, the Craft Cannabis Association of BC, the Kootenay Cannabis Economic Development Council, and ACRES, the Association of Canadian Cannabis Retailers, I believe is what that stands for. And we spent a few weeks hashing out a letter that was like the common denominator agreement of those 4 organizations, and I think it worked, because it's 3 weeks ago is when they said they were going to have the consultation out from the communication that I have.
Well, kudos to you for that advocacy, because I mean, there's a lot of stuff that these folks haven't thought about, and there's stuff that they've thought about, but maybe there's a nuance that is absent from the conversation that needs to be brought. So I have some hope that the province is going to move in the right direction. But I mean, I think we've sort of segued into the second question: what are the challenges with craft cannabis right now? I mean, that's a big challenge. Pathway to market is a huge challenge.
And I want to take a pause here, Kirk and audience, because we are at time. We haven't touched like the discussion part. So I want to know, Kirk, are you okay with going longer, first and foremost?
Yeah, of course, whatever.
Okay, audience, are you guys okay with going longer? Please share things in the chat if you guys are okay with going longer. If any of you who've asked questions have to go, mention that as well. Maybe we'll address the questions first. But I would love to just roll on for another like 30 to 60 minutes, however long it takes, and just be able to. Okay, I just see excitement. Krista's yes. Heck yes, we got it definitely from Robert. Great, let's just
all kinds of
another
good
yes. Yeah, fuck so yeah, that's what I like to see. Oh, lovely
tab I see here.
Yeah. So there's questions, and the way. Oh, you couldn't hear this when I did the housekeeping. The questions tab, and for anybody else who joined later. People can upvote the questions they like there, and then when we get to the question and answer section, we'll go from top voted to least voted and however much time that we have. But it sounds like you have no restrictions. I got no time restrictions, so we can just keep going indefinitely.
Bang her out. Yeah, for sure.
You know what, Kirk? My glass of water is empty, so I'm gonna go fill this up. But if you want to maybe get started on what you see is not going well, the floor is yours.
I will. Yeah, thanks, Sammy. And I appreciate everybody that wants to stay on and listen to me sort of blather on a bit more about weed and weed regulation. Thank you for your time and your interest. It's appreciated. Should we talk about Sammy while he's not here? No, I'm just kidding. I only have good things to say about him anyway. The challenge is, look, for us as a newly regulated company, I don't think I can speak with a ton of personal experience to the challenges that exist, a little bit, but I perceive from talking to others that getting your SKUs, your essentially your product types into the market is a major challenge. And it's a major challenge for a number of reasons. One is that you have to go, at least in British Columbia, through the provincial buyer. They have a limited amount of warehouse space, and as I understand, it's quite full. They take very few new SKUs as a result. And you're also competing with, again, this is sort of like, we're not 2018, 2019 anymore. The retail stores that you're trying to put your product in have hundreds of selections. It's almost too much in a sense when you go into some of these places. Our local, we have 3 different local retail stores here in the Cowichan. There's a small outfit called High Five. There's Indigenous owned 2 stores called Costa Cana, and then there's the Original Farm. And if you go into the Original Farm, for example, I mean, they have hundreds of dried flower varieties. So it'd take you a day to sort of look at their stream menus and sort of go through it all. So that's a challenge, and then it's a challenge to carve out your niche and to build your rapport with your customers because of the branding and the advertising, the marketing restrictions at the federal level and at the provincial level. We are treated so differently from alcohol in that respect. And listen, there's probably a case to be made that what we should do is crack down on alcohol marketing because it's a dangerous substance that does a lot of social devastation in this country. That ain't happening. I don't like having that discussion. because while I might agree with it, although it does conflict a little with the civil libertarian in me, it's pointless to have, because that's not happening. 80% of adults in this country drink alcohol. There's no will whatsoever to crack down on alcohol marketing. None. So why talk about that? A lot of people get pissed off if I sort of compare cannabis to alcohol and the way it should be regulated, because our product is so much safer. Yeah, it's so much safer. That's why I say we should be treated at least as leniently as alcohol is. And we're not. And think about how leniently alcohol is treated, right? You can bring your kids to the booze store, and just coincidentally, all the sort of lemonade beverages that you can't even tell are alcohol are on the bottom 2 shelves where the kids are looking at it. You can go into virtually every place that you can buy food and eat food in the entire province and have alcohol, consume alcohol. You can buy it in any quantity that you want. You can put up billboards advertising it. You can, talk about experiences. You can have little brew pubs where people come and drink and buy booze and t-shirts and walk away. Like, if we treated cannabis as leniently as we treat alcohol, and then you want to have the discussion about whether it should really be like coffee, we can have that discussion then. But I mean, think about how awesome it would be just if we were treated just like alcohol, just like beer and wine. It'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
So we're not there yet, and that poses a whole bunch of real practical challenges for people that are growing limited quantities of a substance, particularly dried flower, that goes bad, that gets worse over time, that you've got to try to get into people's hands. And retail stores right now in BC might want your stuff. I heard from Habitat last night.
Wait, Kirk. I want to stop you there for a moment. Before we get into the ramifications of what you're talking about here and how it affects growers, what do you think is the root cause for this difference between how alcohol is treated and cannabis? Do you think it really just comes down to stigma and that's kind of it, or do you think there's more to it than that?
I think it's more complicated than that. I mean, stigma is a big piece of it, but there are sort of a few moving parts, right? Number one, 80% of Canadians don't consume cannabis. It's not anywhere near as popular as alcohol, not even close. So let's not overestimate how many people give a shit about this issue. That we do because we love weed. There's another subset of people that just like weed that also care because they'd like to just have a little more information or nicer stores or but there's a lot of people that don't care at all, and these are political decisions, right? The second aspect is that we were moving out of prohibition, outright prohibition with mandatory minimum jail terms for as many as 6 plants, into the second country in the world to legalize cannabis for recreational purposes, and the only one doing it with a robust, commercially oriented production distribution system, right? This has not been done anywhere else. And the Liberals did it at a time when they had just taken office, first term, so to speak. And that's big change. That's big change. And the public health professionals are out there who have a lot of pull because they're public health professionals, right? Like, their business is the health of the public. I am less conservative than they are on public health principles because I love cannabis, and I actually understand that it's not that dangerous. But they're saying, listen, the right way to do policy in this area is to start in the most restrictive way possible, or in a restrictive way, and then if the evidence base that you develop in the legal side of the industry supports it, then you loosen up. And that's not an irrational position. Like, I don't agree with it because I know more probably about cannabis than 95% of the people that are involved in making those decisions. And I love it. I'm an aficionado. I'm a true believer. But it's not irrational for people coming from a different perspective to think, yeah, maybe we start a little tighter and then loosen, because once you're loose, you can't really ever go back. That's another piece of it. And then I think there was an insufficient understanding that the way to incentivize one of the government's primary goals, which is with the diminishment and eventual elimination of the illicit market in cannabis, there's an insufficient understanding because of coming out of prohibition and a penalty first and a punishment first mentality, which exists in society on a whole bunch of issues, not just crime, to our detriment. But it's this idea that the best way to prevent something is to make it hard or to penalize people for engaging in it, when actually the best way to transition to a place where the illicit market doesn't ever disappear completely, but is reduced in scope and influence to the point of sort of being a non-entity, is to incentivize the legal industry to compete better, have better products at better prices, and give consumers a better experience. And for the people that want to go do it, to be able to have an easy pathway to do it legally. So it's the carrot instead of the stick. And, we were coming out of the big stick, and there was insufficient attention paid to the carrot aspect of achieving that particular goal.
And if I'm not mistaken, there was never a stated goal. There was never an intention to make it easy for people to transition. That was never one of the 5 or 6 high level.
No,
it was like keeping it safe for the children. That was a big thing. It was,
keep it away from the kids. Blah blah blah.
Make it good, make it easy to tax, eliminate the illicit market. But I think if there was a focus on helping people transition, this is exactly what you're saying. We'd have a totally
I think what you're seeing now, right, in 2018, 2019, there was still a thriving illicit market for cannabis in this country. I'm not talking about the export market that's predominantly controlled by organized criminal groups. I'm talking about the domestic legacy, if you will, market of mom and pops that are still, many of them operating today, but not as many. It was thriving because the legal side couldn't compete on quality, couldn't compete on price, couldn't compete on convenience, because there's only a couple stores. British Columbia, across the country, same thing playing out.
Couple stores and no craft cannabis producers, because everybody was
no craft, no micro.
We're not gonna. This is too hard.
Nothing. Now, and I still, associate with lots of people that remain the mom and pops of the legacy industry, and I think I still understand it. It's a lot harder to be successful in that side of the marketplace, and that's because there's more and more people going to the illicit side as consumers, because there's a lot better quality out there. There's a lot more variety out there. There's been a ton of price compression.
Going to the legal side, you mean?
Going to the legal side. Like down the road, you get $76 ounces at the legal store. And it ain't great, but I was paying $120 an ounce when I was, 16 for Mexican brickweed, and everybody that bought it from me at 40 a quarter still wanted it. And we smoked the shit out of it, right? So this is miles better than that for $76 an ounce.
And that's entirely because of the distribution challenges. Like when there's been terrible supply chain set up in most provinces, and not good cannabis compared to what people are used to in the illicit craft cannabis world, and all of a sudden you have these warehouses that are full of cannabis that isn't moving. Well, what's the OCS going to do? Yeah, they're going to put an $80 price tag on an ounce and just try to move it right through. And when that happens, all of a sudden people who never cared about this cannabis are like, well, if I'm saving 80% of what I pay or whatever that number is, let's do it, even though it's not as good.
There are challenges, but I'm excited about the direction we're going. To me, the other challenges are compliance oriented, right? Love CertiCraft. Would love to spend less time on CertiCraft, tracking things that frankly aren't necessary to achieve the regulator's purpose of preventing diversion and ensuring the quality of the product. There are just things that you don't need to micromanage from a regulatory perspective to achieve those goals.
At the end of the day, the only thing that really should matter is, what do the lab results say? is there anything that should not be on this? Is there a pesticide you use that is illegal in the Consumer Protection of Health Act, whatever that thing is called? Like, there's zero reason for any of the other stuff that gets tracked ahead of time. I mean, I understand the desire to track like the total quantities and to track, movement between producers, but that can be done in a much simpler way.
That can be done in a much simpler way. And I mean, I think ultimately the lesson is sort of this, notwithstanding the canned trusts of the world, where there was some shenanigans. If you want to grow and sell cannabis in the illicit market, I suggest you don't get a license to do it legally, because you're going to spend a lot of money to build out a fancy grow. You're going to have a hell of a huge paperwork burden, and the prices in the illicit market aren't great anymore. I mean,
you're adding taxes in many different layers.
It is so much harder, even today, when you can get pounds of high quality cannabis here in BC for $800, $1,200 a pound. It is so much harder to make money legally in cannabis than it is illegally, that I can't imagine anyone is going to build an expensive grow, go through months of hell with paperwork just to try to sell weed out the back door for not very much money. Like, I mean, nobody's doing that, and nobody will do that because it doesn't make any sense to do that.
Yeah.
They've got to sort of understand that this diversion issue is not really an issue. But yeah, it's not hard to track the amount of weed you produce. It's not hard to track the amount you sell. That stuff's easy. You want to do that anyway if you're running a decent business. But you shouldn't have to track every input that you put into the plant in minute detail. You shouldn't have to track all this. Give me a lab test that shows that I haven't used a banned pesticide, that I don't have heavy metals, that I don't have a microbiological problem. And then let me, as a producer, have a real relationship with my consumer where we can communicate honestly about my product without running afoul of the marketing restrictions, where I can say, yeah, we've smoked this. It's great. It's an uppy, this is what you want if you're going out, for a day on the town, versus, hey, you smoke this and you're going to be knocking stuff over on your way to bed because it's so deadening. And, oh, hey, you want to see how I grow my weed? I'll bring an Instagram live and we're going to walk through the grow, like stuff like that.
And also make
relationships flourish.
And also make it legal to actually try your own cannabis. That is just absolutely bizarre that, I mean, every single industry, nobody creates a product, nobody creates a consumable product without having internal quality assurance. Just test the product, make sure it's actually what you expect it to be. And especially if you're doing pheno hunting and you're doing research and development and you're trying to find new strains, how the hell are you going to know why would you need to get an entire R&D license? It's a totally separate license process just to be able to test your cannabis.
That's beyond, it's so infantilizing to not just the industry, but to the individuals within it. I mean, think of the paradigmatic sort of picture that comes to your head when you think of a winemaker. It's like you're in the dusty basement of the wine cellar and you're cracking open a bottle to have a nice taste of it and see how it turned out. Or you go to the Scotch barrels and you have a drink to see if it's ready, or you pour a little off out of your brewing vessel to see if your beer's any good. Like chefs, I mean, imagine being a chef but you can't taste the food. Like none of that makes any sense at all. And listen, hey, folks, this is the year that they're reviewing the Cannabis Act, right? This is the time to make an impact. Thankfully, we don't have a conservative government in place. I mean, that's the other piece we should go back to very briefly, is the reason there's such ridiculous restrictions is, these are ultimately political decisions. And it sort of harkens back to, not many people care, but a lot of people hate cannabis too in this country. And it wasn't, that long ago. I remember the conservatives, sending you to jail for growing 6 plants, even for non-commercial purposes. So there's a lot of pieces at play, but that review's this year, and we need to make our voices heard. And so people should be talking, particularly, and I can't emphasize this enough, talk to your local elected representative. right? That person has an office in your riding, may not be near you, depending on how big your riding is, where you are, but call that person. Write that person an actual letter. That matters. It really does. And that human contact, particularly now that it seems like we can begin to have human contact again, humanizes the issue and has a great deal of value. And this is the year, right? We need to get some changes made this year. A lot of it can be done by regulation anytime, but realistically, every regulatory change of any consequence is getting run up the flagpole to the political masters responsible for saying yes or no, right? The bureaucrats come up with the set, but ultimately someone in the political side blesses or rejects it. So have those discussions.
So question about that, Kirk. So let's say I want to make my voice heard with this review here. So are you suggesting that I should call up my MP in my riding and be like, hey, these are the things I care about. I think the Cannabis Act and its regulations are problematic for these reasons. I think these few things need to change.
100%. Yeah. And somebody like you that has expertise can say, look, I have expertise in this area. I'm here as a resource to you. If there's anything you want to talk about, anything you need to understand that they're busy people that deal with a myriad of issues. Yeah. Somebody writes them a briefing note, and a staffer. Get to know find out who that staffer is. Hey, do you have someone on your staff that's looking at these issues? I'd love to sit down with that person for an hour and just have a sort of get to know you session. More than that, join whatever your political stripe is, join a riding association. Those are typically very small, not a lot of attendance. And even if it's one that you think might be hostile to the issue, you're in a predominantly conservative riding or something like that, you can go and you can humanize the issue with people. And those people have influence because ultimately the way the system works here is the riding association elects the representative who then, becomes the candidate that becomes the MP. So those, you can have an inordinate impact if you're participating, whether it's for the dominant party or the non-dominant party in your riding. You can have access to candidates who then can talk about issues that you educate them on and make points. So, involvement in the political process is critical.
And do you have any suggestions if your MP is especially conservative, like any like way that you would suggest altering, if at all, what you would say to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to meet them where they are, right? Like you're not going to convince someone listen. There's a few conservatives in particular that are so out to lunch, toaster bud. I'm not sure if you're going to have any success, but at least you humanize it and you show that somebody cares and there's not just unanimity of views on the issue. But try to understand what their concerns are and then try to not immediately dismiss those concerns out of hand just because you don't share them. Yeah. Right? Like I'm a father of 4, ranging from 11 to 20. 10 to 20 now, but soon to be 11. Anyway, and like I got cannabis in the house and stuff, right? Like, I got jars of weed and things like that. But I also have beer in the fridge. I'm not worried about kids and cannabis, right? Because I understand it and it's not something that concerns me. Even though I know that a very small portion of people who smoke cannabis will not be a positive in their lives. And we should acknowledge that. But I'm not going to dismiss out of hand some other parent's concern about that and concern about their kids. That dehumanizes them. That takes you gotta meet people a little bit where they are, and then you have to sort of calmly try to lead them to understanding why you're not as concerned as they might be, and why, even with their concerns, the problems that you see in the regulated system either work against those concerns or they aren't helping those concerns. Mm-hmm. So, the goal of getting rid of the illicit market is sort of an example, right? I don't care if there's an illicit market in cannabis, as long as there's just good people involved in it, right? Like I don't want the gun-toting organized criminals involved in cannabis. I never have. I don't want to speak for them. I've almost never represented anyone from that segment of the cannabis industry. So I don't want them to get arrested. I just sort of want them to go away. But at the same time, I'm not going to sit there and dismiss someone's concern about the shrinkage of the illicit industry. But I am going to say, if you think the way of going about that is to like have raids and like make the rules even tighter, that's actually going to work counterproductive to your goal. And here's why: incentivizing transitions, loosening the rules, building a vibrant legal side that can create relationships with consumers is actually going to achieve your goal much more rapidly than the path that you're advocating for currently.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I like to think most people are reasonable. Sometimes I'm wrong about that. Yeah. That's why I stay off of Facebook. I like to try to maintain my optimism.
Amazing. Thanks for that advice, Kirk.
Hey, we should answer some questions.
Sounds great. Let's take a look at what's here. So most popular is a question by David Hutchinson. He says, greetings, Kirk. What changes to regulations could Health Canada make that would significantly lower setup and operating costs that would reduce the product cost to consumers?
Hey, David. Good to hear from you. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. But we touched on one earlier, which is some kind of workaround that doesn't require you to sort of build out the facility before you get some kind of maybe not a green light, but at least a yellow light or a, hey, you're on the right path from Health Canada. Also, we're in this weird situation where you can grow cannabis outdoors and feed it manure. And, there's bugs everywhere and there's wildlife and there's, all kinds of dirt all the time because it's outside, pollen from other plants. I mean, it's outside. But as long as you pass the test, you can sell that as flower, right? But if you want to grow in an indoor facility, Health Canada wants to micromanage in a sense. You got to have like all our shit stainless steel. The plastic panels on our walls cost a fortune. The tables, everything. There's this huge startup costs to do it on the legal side indoors that frankly, when we were growing in a converted chicken barn with plywood walls, we could pass all the microbiological testing, and we still can pass all the microbiological testing now with all the fancy shit. It's just the fancy shit costs a hell of a lot more to do. So if you can grow it outdoors and sell it as flower in the dirt and the poo and the pollen and the birds land shit and all of that other stuff that goes on outdoors, why do we sort of force these costs on indoor growers? Municipalities exist and regulate construction safety, electrical safety, fire safety, all of that shit. That's a municipal jurisdiction. Health Canada doesn't care about that at all. But that's the only thing that actually should matter about your facility. Maybe a little bit of security. Maybe a little bit of security. But other than that, let's get rid of all this sort of hocus pocus and realize you can grow high quality cannabis in any manner of environments. And if it passes the required product safety testing, that's really all you should need to demonstrate. That's really all you should. And that to me is probably the number one thing that'll reduce operating and that'll reduce setup costs. Number one operating cost reduction is the compliance burden, right? The tracking burden, everything you got to do. I mean, here, I'll give you an example. We use GrowTech nutrients. I put this on Twitter, so it'll bore people that follow me on Twitter, but you should still follow me on Twitter. And it's a 4-part formula. Right? We use their precision. We got micro, we got grow, we got bloom, and we got Vitamix. And so Health Canada wants to know every input to the plant, right? And why you're doing it for traceability. So it's about it's about 100 or so mouse clicks to input that information, because you got to put in the V, you got to put in the grow, you got to put in the micro, you got to put in the Vitamix, you got to put in the bloom, you got to say why you're doing it, how much you did it, what units you used, and all those other things. And it's like, well, at the end of the day, is anyone ever going to look at that? Is anyone ever going to care?
And also, Kirk, you're using. We created a system to allow you to do it by location, so you wouldn't have to do it per batch, because they want it per batch. So if we were doing it exactly how Health Canada wanted, that 100 with a facility like yours where you have 90 different batches of mothers, that would balloon up to 9,000 clicks right there. I mean, every day.
The organic farmers among us might be saying, yeah, well, then just move to living soil and you won't have to do any of that. And they'd be right. And I do grow personally in living soil as well, and have a desire to know more about it. But at the end of the day, none of that matters. Maybe you got to track what you spray on the plants, because that might matter at some point. But what you're feeding the plant, like what? How many times you've maintained your HVAC system? Who cares? At the end of it, if your HVAC system fails, that's your problem. That's not Health Canada's problem. It's not the consumer's problem, because if your HVAC system fails and you get botrytis, well, you're not going to pass the testing unless you treat it in some way. I mean, I guess you could irradiate it, which you wouldn't have to disclose, and I find that kind of strange. I think that should be. I mean, if we're putting all this other information on a label, let's disclose that. But again, I don't know that it should be mandated. I think companies should just say, hey, we do this or we don't do it. Listen, don't get me wrong. If your weed's otherwise good, I'm not sure there's anything wrong with irradiating it, but science doesn't seem to think so. But, you could still get that product to market in the current system. So why are we doing all this stuff if it's not actually achieving any goals other than sort of harming producers' ability to do other things and have smaller teams and be more efficient and either lower product cost, as you say, David, or actually make a decent living? Because there's a lot of micros in particular that are struggling right now. Pathway to market's difficult, and the costs are high, and that's not good for anybody if this doesn't succeed.
And David, I'll add one more bit to that. That's less Health Canada focused, more provincial focused. I think the direct delivery program that's being talked about right now, that's going to be focused on with our next CertiCraft episode, that has a huge chance for BC anyway to really reduce prices for and operating costs for everybody involved. It would cut out. It has the potential to cut out 2 to 3 middlemen that exist right now between the grower and the consumer, which means that the consumer could get both lower costs and the producer can get higher margins for their product at the same time, which of course is a win-win for everybody. And I'm hopeful that as part of direct delivery, first off, I really hope, and we have really stressed to the LCRB and the BCLDB that they need to move away from the centralized system. That it will be a failure if they still force people to ship their cannabis to a central warehouse, which was one of the things being considered. If we do actually move to a proper implementation where there is no centralization, where the government's only involvement is just collecting taxes and that is it, and everything else is just between the producer and the retailer, then there's a very strong argument to have that 15% tax that they charge right now to be reduced down to 5% or something like that, or even lower, because they are not needing to staff people, needing to warehouse, needing to deal with managing sales and all that jazz. And so there should be a reduced cost, and that of course will have a huge impact on margins for producers as well. So I think the provincial side has huge potential to shift things as well. And hopefully, if this rolls out successfully in BC, other provinces will follow that model. Though, of course, BC would just be following what Saskatchewan's done from the beginning here. So it's not like BC is pioneering anything here.
I mean, I fully agree with that. I think there's probably not much flexibility on the 15% simply because the province wants its cut. But I do think, given their limited warehouse space, that direct delivery solves a problem for the province, right? It solves a problem of that limited warehouse space. It does reduce their costs. It would be nice to see that passed along. It's hard to get government to give up part of what they take once they start taking it. But it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. I will piggyback on one point, which is when you talk about middlemen, if Health Canada, like as a micro cultivator, I can package and sell seeds directly to provinces or to retail stores. Health Canada allows me to do that in the context of my license. I don't even need a sales amendment. What I can't do is sell flower in that same way. I need the processing license to sell flower. I think particularly for micros, that needs to change. If you got rid of that middleman, in other words, especially with direct delivery coming and Farmgate, coming on track, as a micro cultivator, I need to be able to sell directly without having to go through any middleman, including a processor. Now, I could get a microprocessing license, but the requirements for the microprocessing license are
ridiculous.
They're significant, right? They're significant, and they're ultimately not necessary either for a microprocessor that's just packaging their dried flower, putting a stamp on the package and selling that dried flower. Should there be a little more stringent requirement if you're, making concentrate? Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's some justification for saying, well, we kind of want you to have some expertise and a little bit of safety knowledge about, the machinery you're using and the solvents you're using in particular. But if I'm selling flour, dry sieve, ice water extract, and even rosin, I should be able to do that within the context, certainly at least flour within the context of my microcultivation license. I should be able to package my flour and sell my flour directly. That would sort of change the game, I think, for a lot of micros.
And if you guys are interested in hearing a very in-depth discussion that was super eye-opening about this very topic, check out episode 2 of the State of Craft with Tamara Follet. We have all of our previous episodes up on YouTube. And if you like the series, please subscribe on YouTube. We want to hit 100 followers so that we can have a
like and subscribe above.
Yeah, like and subscribe. I think it's below once this goes on YouTube. I've yet to do that, though. I should start thinking about that. Cool. Let's go to the next question here by Krista. Krista says, can you address the issues with banking in the cannabis sector? Any advice for new companies trying to set up business accounts?
Yeah, it's a dicey one. We have not had problems with banking services ourselves, although in the past that has been an issue. I think there, at least in BC, is a credit union that is actively marketing itself to cannabis companies as the alternative to traditional big banks that maybe don't want to deal with our industry. For me, it's a weird one because like all of the big banks have substantial equity positions in the public markets in cannabis companies as part of their portfolios. That's just some of them have direct relationships. I think BMO put a $250 million credit facility in for Canopy a couple of years ago. They're making money off the industry in the markets, right? But they don't want to service individual cannabis companies. And I find that reprehensible. All I can really say is, there's a lot of banks out there, and you sort of, if you strike out at one, you got to go to the next one.
And credit unions are your friend. Like they're a lot more open to it, and there's been a lot more credit unions coming online in the past couple of years that are willing to work with cannabis producers. If you are in BC, talk to the BC Craft Farmers Co-op. They've got good connections to a few credit unions that they should be able to make some introductions for you. And I know Alberta has a credit union that's been pretty popular amongst small scale growers. And one great resource is on Facebook. Tamara Follet, who I just mentioned, she started the I think it's now called the Cannabis Micro Licenses group or something. I forget what it's called. It's a Facebook group with thousands of small scale growers, and there's been quite a few threads in there about this very issue with a bunch of solutions shared there. So if you just find that group and just search on there for bank or credit union or just a term like that, you will find 2 or 3 really, really invaluable threads full of amazing information. All right, let's go
right on. I see Kate asked a question about the sales amendment and seeds, and my working understanding currently is that I can sell seeds without that sales amendment. I could be wrong about that. I mean, 100%. It is a micro cultivation license. I know I can sell seeds without a processing license. I may need the sales amendment to sell seeds directly to the province, for example, or to retail stores in provinces where you can sell directly to retail stores. I can't sell directly to consumers, obviously, at all currently. But
Sarah, do you know?
Now I got to do research, Kate.
Sarah, do you know? Since you're on this call too, and I think you might have been involved with that. Anyway, if you're listening, Sarah, and you have an answer, feel free to share. I'm
hearing beeps, so maybe that somebody's talking in the chat.
There's a lot of talk in the chats, yeah. Sam, who I will never give up, is shared a few tidbits about banking in the early 2000s with cannabis, and there's been other things being shared as well.
Yeah. So yeah, Kate, you definitely don't need the processing. The license allows you to sell seeds. I think the Health Canada guidelines, the application guides say that as well. But there's sales amendments required. I'm gonna look into that, and I will tweet about it.
They are especially no, Kate. He wasn't talking about business. He was talking about selling to the provincial distribution boards. Health Canada is especially strict about flower and other products that emerge because there's less of a body of information on combustion and how that interacts with the health of your body. And according to various international, I don't know, I'm not a medical expert, but I know that there is apprehension around that, and that's the reason, one of the reasons of why they made the ability to package things for consumers a lot more stringent, because they just erred on like the most conservative side possible. Sarah, the question that we had for you is if you need a sales amendment to sell to the LDB, or if you can just sell as soon as you have your cultivation license, you can sell seeds to the LDB. If you know that answer, we'd appreciate you jumping in and sharing that. This is Sarah Campbell, by the way. She is the director of the Craft Cannabis Association of BC, an amazing human being doing a lot of great work for craft growers in this area. And hopefully in the not too distant future, we will have a state of craft with her so we can get her take on the state of the craft.
I think, is there just one question there from Nick?
It's from Robert Roy that Nick shared on his.
Oh, okay, right. Came over from the chat. So yeah, Robert. I don't know specifically.
Wait, Kirk. I'm gonna read the question out loud because once it's on YouTube, people won't know what this said. So, for those of you who didn't figure it out from the last context that we have, Kate asked, "Hold up a sec here, Kirk. Did you just say you don't need a sales amendment to sell seeds? Could you please speak to this for a moment? Isn't your license microcultivation?" And Brandon, so that was what was just answered. Robert asked, "Just wondering if there are any changes in the building requirements for a micro license if you are not dealing with dried flowers, as in, do they require you to install a vault for storage?" My screen just went, oh, no, there it is. For storage in a micro license for a seed company.
Yeah, so I don't think there's much flexibility sort of in the building requirements, but ultimately Health Canada's sort of the way they look at the issue is we don't care how you do it, but here's a set of principles you have to comply with, right? All surfaces have to be washable. You have to be able to fully sanitize everything, sort of blah, blah, blah. So I don't think there's much change in the building requirements, but in terms of the vault question, I don't think you need a vault. You don't need a vault in a micro at all, whether you're doing flower or seed. The vault requirement doesn't exist. You just need to show that what you're using to store is secured. And so, for example, in our facility, we have a room that's we call S1, our secured storage room, that we have a fob entry to, although we probably could have just put a lock on it and had a sign-in sheet. It has fob entry and exit. It's a multi-purpose room. I mean, we package seeds in there. We dry. It's also our drying room. You know, it's our seed counting and weighing room, but it's also our storage room. And we store seeds in a freezer or a fridge in that room. And the only thing that Health Canada came back to us on the security front was that we needed to put a lock on our storage cabinet and a lock on our freezer. And so we just bought padlocks at Home Depot and hinges and, you know, screwed them on. That's, you know, and you know, we have SOPs that say, hey, we keep track of whoever goes in the room, and nobody can go in the room unless they're accompanied by a security cleared individual. And at all times, and anyone that's not security cleared is in the room, security cleared individual will be in the room with them. You know, we keep a record when things come out of storage and go into storage. I mean, all the basic paperwork you do. But other than that, you know, the security requirements for a micro, I didn't find onerous really at all. We did install perimeter cameras around the whole facility. That was not a requirement. We did not need any cameras whatsoever inside or outside the facility. We didn't build a fence. We don't have a fence around the facility. I mean, it's basically a door with a padlock, and we have a fob entry, and we do have a motion detector and security system. But I don't think any of that was particularly required.
Yeah, and it's good to note that a lot of what you just shared there used to be required. It was required in 2018, 2019. Like some of our earliest customer like had to deal with a nightmare of getting things set up, only to like once he got his license to be told, oh, you don't need this anymore, after he'd spent $100,000 extra and just a whole 2 months extra building everything and stressing about having an ugly facility now. It's like hideous fence around it and so on and so forth, and a beacon to anybody who might be driving by that says, hey, there's something valuable in here because there's a fence around a building.
Yeah. Anyway, the security requirements for us didn't appear to be too onerous, and frankly, it's stuff we wanted to kind of do anyway, because I mean, I don't want to get robbed. I don't think it's going to happen, but you know, if I can take reasonable precautions to ensure that it doesn't, I'll take those.
Yeah. David Hutchinson has another question. Kirk, do you foresee any additional product categories for SKUs to deliver cannabis in different ways becoming approved?
Yeah, and I saw that question. I wasn't really sure what he was asking, like deliver cannabis in different ways to your body. Like, what are we talking about here? You know, there's a lot of ways that you can buy right now to take cannabis, from suppositories to pre-roll joints.
Are there suppositories in the legal world?
If there aren't, there isn't a ban on them. So it's sort of like, you know, I don't think that market is.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen that in
the drink market's only about 2%, and you know, I think most people would rather have a drink, but and your method may vary, and I'm into whatever you're into there, but I don't know where you're getting at there, David.
I don't see anything else in the question section here. See what's happening in the chat there. Oh,
Charles Dunn had a question in the chat.
Do you want to read it out loud, Kirk, or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, question from Charles Dunn. We have been waiting 2 years for our municipality to allow micro. They've been pushing us off for years now. What can we do to light a fire under the municipality group? They're clearly discriminating. I mean, here's where, you know, you say all politics are local, and at the end of the day, the only way to light fires under elected officials is to threaten their status as elected officials, and or to convince them through the power of persuasion that this is actually good for the municipality. There's a lot of antipathy still to cannabis, particularly in more conservative parts of the country or the province. There's a lot of ignorance and stigma that still exists. You know, I hearken back to what we talked about earlier, which is involvement and participation in the local political process. I mean, depending on where you live, the margin of victory in your local elections could be 20 to 50 to 100 votes, and so to the extent that you can demonstrate that you can influence election outcomes, that's one way. That's a pressure way. That's like the stick way. The other way is the carrot way, which is to go in and try to build those relationships directly. And sometimes it's not going to work. I mean, there are still alcohol dry parts of Canada where municipalities don't let you sell alcohol in the municipality. Like, we're 100 years at the end of alcohol prohibition. So we are early in this process, and it's exceedingly early days in the regulatory sphere. Depending on where you are, Charles, I mean, if you're in the ALR, for example, you have kind of a right to farm, and the municipality has minimal involvement. I'd encourage you to get in touch with Sarah at CCABC.
And Sarah's just posted
in your particular
her email
municipality. There. I see Kyle is forcing a town vote here on a bylaw amendment. That's politics and local politics in action.
And a lot of people in local municipalities really just have ideas around cannabis. It comes from a place of stigma, and I've heard of many stories of people who've gotten their micros approved by their local municipalities, where what it took was just going to a city council meeting, going to some kind of public forum, and making it known, hey, this is who we are, initially being met with a lot of anger or fear, and then people warming up to them over the course of 30 minutes, 60 minutes as they realize, oh, you're just a normal human who
we had that very experience in our municipality in a meeting about cannabis, and we actually were able to, just through the power of conversation amongst people in the group, change some people's minds, and that's meaningful. Charles, you asked if can they force it to the ALR? And I think the answer is yes. I don't think, like, you can't sue for discrimination under the charter or under human rights unless the discrimination is based on the specifically enumerated grounds, race, sexual orientation, religion, gender, those kinds of things. You can't just, there's no general cause of action for discrimination. And so, I'm not a lawyer anymore. This isn't legal advice, but there certainly isn't a charter fight. There may be some kind of municipal regulatory law fight that you could have. But municipalities have a great deal of latitude in land use regulation, And that's the way our country and our province is designed.
And Sarah, I apologize for not realizing that wasn't you who was talking. There's two Sarah C's here, and I assumed the Sarah C was Sarah Campbell, but it turns out it was Sarah Cunningham, who is part of the Cannabis Secretariat's office. Hi, Sarah Cunningham. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Sarah Cunningham. Nice to see you again as well.
And hi, Sarah Campbell. Nice to see you here.
And Sarah as well. Probably logged in from the Grey Gardner Farms facility, where I am not currently present. So,
Kirk, do you have any final thoughts or words or advice or general sentiments, anything that you want to share with our lovely audience here today and our future audience on YouTube?
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for your attention, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about, my favorite topic, cannabis, and one of my favorite subtopics, regulatory policy. Making it better. With that caveat, it is one of my favorite topics. But I appreciate the audience, appreciate the questions. I hope people watching on YouTube, that see this and care about this issue, get involved in their local, provincial, and federal politics. That's how you make long-lasting difference. I believe that the era of regulatory reform through litigation, which at some point I'll write a PhD thesis on, is probably over, largely over, at least in terms of the charter. And so we made a lot of gains there. We fought a lot of battles, and I think we changed the country and potentially the world, given that the example of Canada is one that other countries can point to to show that legalization isn't a sky is falling moment and does make a lot of sense for all its flaws. So
Poor Uruguay getting completely ignored. Nobody cares that Uruguay
they don't have a robust commercial system, right? And that makes it different, right? There's a I think it's a different regulatory model. And there's also, of course, the fact that the West gets primacy as a privilege in a lot of discourse, and I'm as guilty as that as anybody else. Yeah. But we made a lot of gains in the courts. But there's a point at which the courts will say to you, the charter doesn't require great policy. The charter doesn't even require good policy. The charter guarantees a minimum that policy doesn't infringe certain of your rights. And so it's going to be, in my estimation, very difficult to make regulatory reform gains in the courts. The place that we make progress now is in the political sphere, in the regulatory sphere. And it's also important to realize that most of the people working in those spheres are decent people that may not agree with you on everything or on anything, either through a failure of communication, a failure of an evidence base, or a failure of sort of viewpoint. Or they might actually be right on some things too. Like, open yourself up to the possibility that we don't necessarily have all the answers, and that there's room for balance. But get involved in that process and be compassionate in that involvement. Be engaged, be responsive. Try to solve other people's problems and not just tell them what yours are, because often the solution to both your problems and their problems is the same. You just have to find a way to get there. Mm-hmm. So I'm optimistic. Like number one and always at the top is we're arresting a whole hell of a lot less people for cannabis than we did 3 years ago, pre-legalization. That is absolutely the most important thing. The consumer, the casual cannabis consumer, is essentially no longer a target of law enforcement. And that's absolutely fantastic. The industry side will work itself out, but it's also just the industry side, Mm-hmm. It's going to be difficult. There's going to be bumps and hills to climb and obstacles put in your way, some of which don't make any sense at all. But I'm optimistic about the future, and I think if we have more discussions like this and more people get involved, we can accelerate the change that we want to bring about. So, awesome. Go forth and prosper.
Thanks, Kirk. So yeah, to wrap things up here, first off, huge thank you to Kirk. You're getting lots of love here from the chat. Thank you to our audience for being here today. For those of you who missed it earlier, our next episode in 2 weeks is going to be with the BCLDB, with the LCRB, and with the Cannabis Secretariat's office. We'll have a rep from each ministry, and we'll be getting deep into what their process is like to create this direct delivery program, to create Farmgate. How does a government organization that has no expertise on cannabis, on this industry that is foreign to them, how do they even go about figuring out what matters, what doesn't? BC has been very great about admitting that they have fucked up over the past couple of years with their policies. So how do they go about ensuring that these programs actually reach the potential that they have to solve a myriad of the issues that we talked about here today? So that's going to be next episode. Last but not least, I've got a song for one of you who is here in the audience. Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down, never gonna run around and hurt you, never gonna tell a lie, never gonna say goodbye. Yeah. Turn around and desert you.
Hey, Sammy.
Oh, she knows who she is. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Sami. I'm one of the founders of CertiCraft. Like I said at the beginning, we're on a mission to help craft cannabis producers transition into and thrive within the new regulated market here in Canada. I've got to stop saying new because it's like we're on year 3 right now. This is not new anymore. This has been Kirk Tousaw, and as soon as we stop this event here, it'll replay in about 2 or 3 minutes. So if you missed the beginning and
tune back in, watch it again.
Yeah, it's only 2 hours. It'll go live on YouTube in the next few days, hopefully. I'm not going to put a promise on that, but at some point soon it'll be on YouTube. And thank you all for being here.
Right on.
Bye.
Bye.